let's kick off the webinar. My name is Eric Elliott, and I'm the Advanced Hunter Education Coordinator with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And tonight, we're going to tackle the final big game species in our Advanced Hunter Education webinar format. So we've done bighorn sheep, we've done pronghorn, deer, elk, and now we're going to be closing out the 2024 webinar series with bear. So tonight we've got the statewide bear coordinator, Arjun Deer, on with us, and he's going to be talking bear natural history, biology, and then we're going to have two other fish and wildlife biologists, Mike Brown and Danny Gammons, are going to be closing out the webinar, and we're going to be kicking around bear hunting tactics. So let's get the conversation going with the participants. And I've got a question to ask you, and maybe Liz and Ryan, you could post this question in the chat. So for the participants, have you ever hunted bears? And if so, have you ever harvested a bear? So let's kind of get a pulse on our audience. So have you ever hunted bears? And if so, have you ever harvested a bear? So let's get the conversation going with that. And Arjun, thanks so much for being with us tonight. Go ahead and take it away. The floor is yours, brother.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. And yeah, good evening, everyone. And thank you all for being here. Really excited to talk to all of you today. As Eric indicated, my name is Arjun Deer. I'm the statewide black bear coordinator. Started about 11 months ago now. Hard to believe, it's gone by very quickly. But it's been a really, really busy year, really exciting year for black bear conservation and management in California. So just really stoked to be here with all of you. I'm going to start by just giving an overview of the presentation format for at least my portion of the presentation. So the purpose of these slides initially are just informational. I'm here to give information on black bear natural history and biology in California. That's what I'll start with, and then I'll provide an overview of some of the work that the black bear program is doing. So I'm not here to really chat about regulations about black bears directly, but I'll be giving an overview of the work that we're doing at the moment. And there's a lot going on for sure. So first of all, just regarding the natural history of black bears in California, or black bears in general, really, and everyone's probably already aware of this, but they are very ecologically flexible. They're omnivores. They can cope and deal with human disturbance very, very well. In fact, one of my favorite facts about them is that they outnumber all other 7 bear species in the world combined. So that includes giant pandas, brown bears, polar bears, sloth bears, sun bears, Andean bears. These American black bears outnumber all of them, which I think is really a testament to how successful they are. And it's one of my favorite things about them. Because they have such a wide range across, a lot of North America, they live in a variety of climates. So most will hibernate in winter, go dormant when there's less food, less resources around. But there's definitely a lot of exceptions to that rule in areas where, for example, there's a lot of human activity and food available even in the winter months in places like Tahoe, in the Tahoe Basin, or parts of it at least. Some bears stay active the whole winter, which is, really interesting because they don't need to go down for that time period. They generally breed every other year. So sows will give birth to a litter of typically 1 to 4 cubs. It can be larger in exceptional cases in January or February of the given year, and then they'll emerge from the dens in the springtime. So yeah, that's just a quick overview of their biology and behavior. In California themselves, I'm really excited to present this map because it's the first range map we have for the species in the state since 2009. So we just recently worked on this with our connectivity program. So they cover about 40% of the state's surface area in terms of residential populations. They've actually expanded in parts of the North Bay, parts of Modoc County up in the Northeast, and elsewhere across the state in the Sierra Nevada foothills. So they've expanded their range a little bit, and again, want to underscore their ecological flexibility that's allowed them to do that. So yeah, that's the new range map. First update since 2009, and that's going to be presented in the near future as part of our new bear plan, which I'll talk about in a minute. And because California is so biogeographically diverse, it kind of makes sense to study bears, monitor them in different zones. Previously we had we still have a statewide view, but we're interested in looking at their biology in these different so-called bear conservation regions, or BCRs. These were presented in the previous draft Black Bear Conservation and Management Plan for California. I'm working right now with my team on final version of that plan. And so there's 9 of these BCRs. As you can see, 5 of them are where there's currently black bear hunting. Those are colored in solid. The other 4 are, in hash marks. Those are the non-hunting areas. So yeah, we're looking at, a really diverse state. And because of that, it absolutely makes sense to kind of take a finer scale view of how the species behaves and how we can monitor them in these different areas. I don't want to bore you all with statistical jargon, so I won't, but we are doing a lot of population monitoring and estimating what are called vital rates of these species. So things like litter size that sows or female bears produce, pregnancy rates of female bears across different age classes. That'll generally, again, hover around 0.5 because they generally give birth every other year. We're looking at survival rates of black bears based on sex and overall. So we're looking at all these different parameters across the different BCRs that I was just talking about to understand basically population dynamics. It really gives us a very flexible approach to monitoring the population and a contemporary modernized approach to doing that. So yeah, just really exciting stuff going on right now in the Black Bear program. I'm working a lot with our modelers, statistical modelers, and our field staff, and it's really a cohesive effort that is going very well at the moment. So speaking of the Black Bear program, and kind of shifting away from the biology aspect of things, I want to give a quick I guess introduction to the history of the program. So black bears were classified as fur bearers in 1917. So there's a long history of black bear management in the state. They were then reclassified as game mammals in 1948. And then fast forwarding to 1998 was our black bear management plan, which is since being updated now. We had our draft Black Bear Conservation and Management Plan for California go out for public review in April of this year, and the public review period ended in June. So we're very, very close to the finish line now. We'll have it published at early part of 2025. So it's been a long time coming. It's been an enormous effort, and it's been a team effort. So we're really excited about that. One of the central, most exciting component of this new Black Bear Conservation and Management Plan for California is that we're using a new population monitoring approach to count bears, essentially, and understand how different ecological parameters, such as drought or fire or human bear conflict, things like that, might affect the population, and also how they're interacting with other species like deer or mountain lions, et cetera. So it's a really flexible, adaptive, management approach that we're applying that, is kind of the next step from that 1998 plan. So yeah, it's been a big project. We're still using the hunter-derived, hunter-harvested data from bears, extracting the premolar teeth. When those are, as you all know, when those are cross-sectioned, you can get the bear's age and other information. So that's still a central component of this new monitoring approach. But we're also using other sources of data, such as local density surveys and things like that. So this new Black Bear Conservation and Management Plan for California that I just mentioned has 2 main goals, kind of a tongue twister, 2 goals, but the first one is to conserve and manage black bear populations that are ecologically functional, disease resilient, genetically diverse statewide and regionally, and to conserve and enhance their habitats. That ecologically functional aspect I really want to emphasize because that really links to other species too and the ecosystem as a whole. So it accounts for the the sustainability and the performance of populations of other species such as deer and mountain lions. And you go down the list, every species that inhabits the ecosystems that black bears are in. The second goal is sort of partly human focused as well, because black bears are so flexible and kind of conflict prone to an extent. We also want to emphasize the human aspect. And so that second goal is to provide opportunities for black bear hunting, viewing, and public education to minimize human black bear conflict to consider animal welfare in black bear conservation and management and be inclusive of all Californians in black bear conservation and management decisions. So again, those are the two goals that are provided in the plan. So one huge effort that we're undertaking right now is to deploy GPS collars on black bears. That gives us a lot of information on their survival, their home range, their litter size, because we can follow up with them at their dens, the habitats they're using, connectivity, proneness to roadkill, things like that. It gives us a lot of valuable information. We're collaring over 150 bears between this year and next year. We currently have about 130 collared as a department. And so we're going to continue to roll out that effort across the state through next year. It's been a really, really huge effort. Obviously, it's an enormous state, and we want to have representative data and have our decisions, management and conservation decisions rooted in the best available science, essentially. So the GPS collars support that to a great extent. Another thing we look at, and what I'm doing here essentially is going through different topics that sort of provide the conservation and management framework that's within this plan that I was just talking about. So another key aspect of that is genetic diversity. Black bears are very genetically diverse in the state. They're very healthy. It's a very robust population. We have about 60 to 65,000 bears in California, black bears at the moment. So it's a large, robust population and well connected across those different BCRs that I was talking about. There's currently a statewide genomic study underway between CDFW and University of California, Santa Cruz. We just recently had a full genome assembly conducted for a black bear in California. So that's an effort that's going to continue to be done. We plan to reassess genetic diversity every decade, potentially, but no more frequently than that because they are so healthy, or genetically diverse at least. As far as movement ecology and connectivity, those GPS collars that I was talking about, along with camera trap data at overpasses and underpasses, and working with agencies like Caltrans, we're trying to understand how black bear populations might be impeded by different different potential barriers. We have a connectivity program at our department now that's under that I'm working with, and providing a lot of good information there. And it includes other species too. I mean, black bears are just one of several that are studied in these connectivity questions. Disease is certainly an important topic. Things like Maine and encephalitis and even plague and other diseases can affect black bear populations. So we have veterinarians at our wildlife health lab who keep track of these things. We do necropsies for bears, carcasses that are collected, and try to understand how disease can affect the population and how it might be related even to things like conflict. So it's a really important topic that we are looking into as well. On top of that, like I mentioned, animal welfare is part of our goals for black bear conservation and management in the state. So an example, related to the importance of animal welfare is the cub rehabilitation program that we have at CDFW. So for cubs that are orphaned in the wild, if they're candidates for rehabilitation, they're taken in and raised and then released in the wild with a GPS collar, so we can keep track of where they end up, how their survival in the wild. So far, it seems like they're doing very well. The strong majority of the bears that have been released continue to survive, and it's a really promising project. We're still hoping to get additional sample size. It's only been a couple of years so far, so it's still underway, but really excited by the success of that program so far. And then, last but not least, human interactions with black bears and, human black bear conflict is a really important topic. They can be prone to, entering urban areas, and if attractants are not secured, trash, things like that. Bears can even remember when trash day is. So they'll come and they'll attack, not attack, but, raid garbage bins and dumpsters and things like that. They're very clever, very smart, and, can get into some trouble. So we try to emphasize coexistence and avoiding conflict in the first place. CDFW is a Bearwise member agency. So Bearwise is an interagency effort to promote human bear coexistence, and CDFW is a member of that. So we do a lot of outreach There's booths, there's brochures, there's different presentations that are done by our regional biologists all across the state regarding these things. But a big thing is securing a track fence and keeping bears out of trouble in the first place. And then in addition to that, and kind of the last main thing I wanted to touch on was, obviously, I just mentioned all these different streams, different topics, and it's a lot of data coming in to us, and it's a lot of data to manage and to wrangle and to, handle in general. So we have, we're centralizing a lot of our databases for black bear analyses, essentially, black bear focused analyses, ecological studies. These data comes from, remote game, trail cameras, the GPS collars I talked about, den checks, going out and assessing things like litter size and survival and things like that. It's a ton of data, disease, all those different topics that I was going through. So we're finding ways right now to handle that data, process that data, clean that data, and have scientific publications come through that can support, evidence-based, science-based conservation and management for the species, to really have an ecologically functional black bear population in the state. And so, that was basically what I had to say. That was the gist of it. I've listed my contact information there. If folks want to reach out, please feel free to. But yeah, that was my overview. Thank you all for listening. And I guess I will hand it off to Mike and Danny now.
Arjun, thanks so much for being on here with us tonight. You're well-spoken, and just kind of on a personal level, tell us what your best part of your job is. What's the most favorite part of your job, brother?
That's a great question. So, obviously, I love going to the fields. I was trained as a field biologist, coming up. That's the most exciting part. But honestly, working with the people so far, I've only been at CDFW for 11 months now, like I said. But people like Mike and Danny taught me a lot. They're really seasoned, bear biologists. That's been an awesome experience. And being able to work in all the different regions, right? We're a huge state with 7 regions total, 6 terrestrial regions. I've been able to visit all of them now and work with regional biologists and work with the public. So I think the people aspect has been, the most rewarding. Folks have been really friendly, and it's been a lot of fun.
I love it. I love the fact that you're coming on to a bear hunting webinar and talking and sharing information with bear hunters. And so just for, if someone tuned in late for presentation, is Fish and Wildlife for or against bear hunting?
Well, black bears are classified as a game mammal in California. So, it's there. We provide it. They were classified as a game mammal in 1948.
Yeah.
And
Right on, brother. Thank you so much. So the next portion of the webinar is we're gonna just kind of kick around. We're gonna kind of have a table talk about bear hunting tactics. Can you guys see my screen? Is it full screen for your view?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. So I've got Danny Gammons and Mike Brown with us tonight, and we're going to be talking bear hunting tactics. Danny, if you don't mind, start us off. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you do for a living.
Sure. So I'm a supervisor in the wildlife program in the Bishop field office over in Inyo County. And I've been working for the department since about 2017. I've been involved with large carnivore work for most of my career, but it's been pretty heavily focused towards bears, actually. And I worked in the Park Service for a number of years. Most of wildlife conflict related things. I was involved in recovering for a couple of years with the Louisiana black bear, which is actually was a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. And what I think is really cool about that, it's been a number of years since I worked on it, but not too many species get to be recovered for the Endangered Species Act, and that one was, and they're having their very first hunt this year. And that was just a cool part of my career years ago.
That's
That's
awesome,
that's a
Danny.
little bit
Thanks.
about me.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing. And how about you, Mike?
Yeah, I'm Mike Brown. I'm a biologist, also out of the Bishop office. I'm working on a variety of different projects, but primarily I've always been working on regional black bear research here in the Eastern Sierra. I've been with the department for about 10 years. Before this, though, I also have, some experience in the Park Service working with black bears and dominantly conflict management in places like Yosemite. And yeah, I get to, spend a lot of time tracking and capturing wildlife, specifically black bear, as part of my job. But, recreationally, I also really enjoy hunting and fishing and just spending a lot of time in the mountains and the woods looking for animals.
Love it. So I think we need to preface this portion of the webinar. We're not, all three of us, we're not claiming in any way, shape, or form to be like your expert bear hunters. All we're saying is we've poked around the woods quite a bit. These guys know a ton about black bear behavior, and my background as a game warden for I think this is year 28 for me, is I've checked a lot of bear hunters, and I've been around a lot of the bear woods, and I do a lot of have done some black bear hunting myself. And so um, yeah, I'm looking forward to kicking around different ideas with these guys. And I I'll just start it out by saying I think black bears are like one of the coolest wildlife species to observe. And I've had the privilege of just watching them undisturbed for years and years. And that some of that's at like a bear bait pile, or we're doing surveillance on hunters that are illegally harvesting bears, and bears are in the area, and a ton of bears are working that bait. And just to watch bears and their behavior and how they interact with each other is fascinating. Would you guys agree with that? Just
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're one of the most just interesting species I've ever come across, and it's why I've dedicated my career towards it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think
It's there. I think it, from a couple of standpoints, their intelligence is what is really
Mhm.
interests me from standpoint of a lot of work with your wildlife managers involved in conflict mitigation with bears, and their intelligence makes that a challenge. And their intelligence, it can make them a challenge, and their senses as they're a formidable prey, to hunt as well. They're a real challenge. And when you get one on the ground, you've really accomplished something.
really true. And I often tell hunters that California offers two wildlife species to hunt that I think provide better opportunities for hunting than what other states offer. And that's bear and turkey. And for bears, one of the reasons is we just offer such a long season. The long fall season, it goes from mid-August until late December. This year, the season ends December 29th. And the other reason that for opportunity is that we have over-the-counter affordable tags, and we just have a lot of bears in certain areas, and a lot of bears on public land. And I don't know if I should say this too loud because it'll bring a lot of bear hunters into different areas, but we offer a lot of big bears. Throughout my patrol, I would often see hunters from New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado, Montana, and I'd often ask them, "So why are you hunting here? You've got bears in your state." And oftentimes their response is, "You guys have a ton of bears. You guys have over-the-counter tags, and you have humongous bears." So I think that's bear hunting in California is a huge opportunity, and I think more people are finding out about that. I've in fact more and more bear specific hunters in the last few years. So let's change slides. What I want you guys to do is kind of interpret this slide for us. Tell us about what's going on in this slide. Maybe Danny, you can start us out, and then maybe if you don't mind, Mike, you can follow up on what hunters can learn by this slide.
Yeah, sure. So what these slides are showing, these are some points or fixes from the GPS collars that we've put on bears out here in the Eastern Sierra. And you notice we put the collars on bears in the Eastern Sierra, but some of those far western points are nowhere near the Eastern Sierra. They're closer to Fresno or wherever that's at. I can't quite tell. These bears can at times make really huge movements, and people don't often think about bears being migratory, like a deer or a bighorn sheep or something. But in a sense, in a real sense, they can be migratory. And what that, from at least from a hunting standpoint, what that translates into is, these bears are driven to pack on as many calories as possible. They've got two jobs in the world: is to make more bears and eat food. And what that translates for a hunting is, just because you've got an area that might have a bunch of bears in it one year, they may not be there the next year. They're constantly seeking out that next source of food. And I think that's one of the real keys about this. And you deer hunters will certainly know that as well. You just mule deer are not necessarily going to be in the same place every year, and bears very much the same.
So Mike, why would a bear move all the way? This right slide is showing look like bears on the Eastern Sierras, and then you've got also bear movement on the looks like all the way on the west slope of the Sierras. Why would a bear move all the way over from the east side to the west side?
Well, I mean, you can look at the data and make inferences, but like Danny said, what makes the most sense is that these animals are tracking seasonal forage opportunities and seasonal crops. I think when we've seen these big trans-Sierra movements, they can correspond to maybe not very good local pinyon years and really good oak acorn years on the west side. And if some of these bears have done those kind of movements multiple times throughout just the duration that we've had them collared, and leads one to believe that it's not a uncommon thing for bears to make these kind of big movements, and in particular focusing on that seasonality of food crops, and just what they're focusing on. The slide on the right might be a little muddled, but what you can see there is that you have a pretty tight home range for most of the year, and then the larger points are during the late archery rifle season, and it's kind of moving into a totally different area. So as hunters and people looking for bears, keeping that seasonality and just the fact that they can move really large distances throughout the year in mind can really help you figure out where you might want to be.
Outstanding. So something that I've noticed is, I think Danny hit on it really well. It's like, what are bears wanting to do? They're wanting to reproduce, and they're wanting to eat. And so if you can find what they're eating, find their food source, you're likely going to find bears. And I think one of these slides shows that these bears are moving. I think Mike was talking about a poor pinyon crop year. So pinyon pine, so those bears are hammering those pinyon pines when they're available. And if there's not a good crop, I just find it so fascinating that they're like, well, there's no food here. Let's find let's find an area where there is food. And Mike was telling me that bears were moving from the eastern Sierras all the way over to like Folsom, California, into the western slope of the Sierras, and they're eating acorns over there. So I think that's really, really fascinating and really cool, and that can be really edifying information for a hunter to know that. Like one year, you might find a ton of bears in one area if there's a good food source. Let's say like a berry patch where they're just hammering berries. The very next year, that berry patch hasn't produced, and you're gonna have to find a whole nother area to hunt bears. Let's go to the next slide. Um, let's talk about seasonal patterns. Mike, since you're on with us right now, talk about emergence. What is emergence?
So it's kind of just a way to think about the kind of behavioral ecology and patterns of black bears throughout the year. So emergence in this sense is referring to that period of time right after the denning period in the winter, that they're emerging from their dens that they've been occupying over the winter. And in each of these seasons, you're going to have different kind of behavioral patterns, and you're going to have different motivations for bears, and also different food and forage availabilities that are going to be kind of important to keep in mind when looking for bears throughout the year.
So you've got a bear emerging from the den. They're getting out of the winter phase, and so what are they usually eating that time of year? Let's just say in the experience that you have in the areas that you work, like in the mountains, what are they primarily feeding on?
Yeah, out here in the Sierras, typically you see them start to forage on grass. So you find scats that are full of grass, and you find the bears, in meadows. You can certainly start getting into insect crops and ripping up logs or looking for ground nests a little bit later. But as you go throughout the year and food availability changes and go through the breeding season and into the later part of the year, that can kind of change. And so, like Danny was mentioning, you may see bears, for instance, out here in meadows, or be finding old scats with a bunch of grass in them. Early in the year, that doesn't necessarily mean that would be the ideal place to look at the end of the year, say.
Really good point. I think that's a common mistake I've seen with hunters, whether I'm checking hunters in the field, and oftentimes they'll say there is so much deer or bear sign, and then you start asking them, well, what was in the sign? And a lot of that is really old sign, a lot of grassy sign, and from early summer, late spring kind of thing. And a lot of times those bears are nowhere to be found during the hunting season. So Danny, talk to me a little bit about the breeding season. When is the breeding season for bears, and maybe how can knowing that affect or help a hunter?
Well, the bears are going to be breeding in the sort of right around June-ish or so is really when the peak of the breeding season is. And out here anyway, that's sort of where the peak right around in there is when most of the deer fawns are dropping. So there is a pulse of time. Doesn't last for very long. Bears are pretty much around here, black bears anyways, are pretty much vegetarians. But when fawns are hitting the ground, they can be a pulse of food there for a period of time before those fawns get big enough to just up and run away. Generally, bears, there's always exceptions, but the general rule, the black bear's got to run after its food. It's too much work. But if there's some fawns on the ground, they're more than happy to snack on them. But the breeding occurs during June and or more or less. makes it difficult for us for trapping sometimes because they're, for our efforts, they're less focused on eating. That's the time of the year when they're least focused on food. So the trapping can slow down a little bit. In terms of how that might impact a hunter, you know, I me off immediately I can't necessarily think of anything because it's still too early for for those first archery seasons to come in. Those first by the time archery season comes in, breeding's definitely over with. A little bit sort of before that real hyperphagia season kicks in, where bears are just really, trying to eat 10,000 plus 20,000 calories a day. Not sure if that answers your question really or not.
Yeah, it really does. But really, the hunting season kicks in with this hyperphagia stage, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, outstanding. So let's talk about seasonal forage, food crops. Let's look at this slide off to the left. Mike, what can you tell me about this bear poop? What can you learn from that as a hunter? And you're looking at that, you come across that. What does that tell you as a hunter?
Well, from that particular scat you're looking at, you'll be able to age it and gauge its freshness. Obviously, the more fresh it is, how soft and moist it is, it's going to tell you, is this what the animal has been foraging on recently? And then, most importantly, looking at the content. If it's full of pine nut husks, like this one, you're going to be able to infer, okay, at least this bear has been really focusing on pine nuts, and maybe I should be out in the pinyon trees. And also looking at the kind of the proportions of those scat. Like, is it just a half pine nuts, half rose, or half some berry seeds? Is it all pine nuts? Are you finding multiple scats that are just all pine nuts? In which case, that can really give you some really just valuable information in what these bears are focusing on, and thus where they might be.
Outstanding. I think the other thing it can do is even if you're running across old sign, so you come across in this left slide, you're looking at this bear poop, and it looks like it's super old and maybe from last year, but it's full of husks from pinions, and I think we've actually patterned bears in future years by looking at really old sign and looking at sign that's like, okay, the bears last year were in here and they were hammering on pine nuts. And I think that's a really good way to pattern bears by looking at not only fresh sign, but you can also pattern bears by looking at old sign. So let's get
Yeah.
into the nitty gritty, guys. Talk to me a little bit about hunting tactics, how to actually hunt these bears. Let's start with Mike. Talk to me about trailing.
Yeah, so method of trailing generally refers to finding fresh tracks or sign of bears, and then trying to follow that animal. You know, depending on the activity patterns of bears, you could try to trail that animal to where in the time of day you're out there, you could try to trail that animal to where it's feeding, or to maybe where it's bedded down for the day. But having the ability to not only recognize bear sign, but looking for the the freshness of those tracks. Even if you're not coming up on the animal, you can really learn quite a lot of valuable information following 2-day old tracks to just kind of see what these bears are doing, and learn about how they're moving around the landscape. And
So have you guys ever actually uh, tracked a bear or trailed a bear and based on track and then actually ended up finding that same bear?
um I can talk. I mean, personally, I've used it quite a lot for for trapping and for
Mhm.
trying to get on a specific animal and kind of learning what those bears are doing in those areas. It can be challenging because you know you never know how far these bears are going. You can sometimes get on like more or less a traveling track where an animal is just moving in a straight line, and you're not seeing evidence that it's stopping and feeding anywhere, and you could follow that bear for miles. Whereas, you know, if that bear is just up there in kind of a food plot or at a watering hole or something, you could get in and potentially see that animal. But it is or it can be very, very challenging, especially depending on the substrate.
Yeah. And then this other tactic of running roads out, I think that's a pretty, and you're not running roads necessarily to find bears to shoot right there, but running roads, uh, that plays a big role in bear hunting. And you're basically looking for bear sign, aren't you? Bears coming off of a bank, bears running roads.
One of
If
the
bears,
yeah, sorry.
go ahead, Danny.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I didn't. But yeah, I think what we're talking about here is not necessarily, like hoping to spot a bear off the road,
Mhm.
necessarily. But one of the real useful things that roads provide is when you're looking at a track, if you're deciding am I going to follow that track, am I going to try and catch up with that bear or not, is the age of it. And what a road provides you, especially a dirt road, is it provides you generally a known time, more or less, that road has been driven over, depending on how well you know the road. A lot of them you can assume if you get out there at first light, it's a reasonably traveled road and there's tracks on top of the tire tracks. You're on something a lot fresher. Whereas if you're out in the woods, you have to rely on to age a track off. You have to rely on some other cues that may be more subtle in determining age. So I think that's one real advantage of going down these dirt roads. If you're driving down the road just hoping to shoot a bear because one was nearby the road, you're going to get to see a lot of pretty country. But that's about it.
Really good point,
And
Danny.
that's a good point in itself, that it is a way to cover a lot of ground to find that starting sign.
And what I found running roads is once you find bears and find what their food source is, it's it's pretty obvious. It's not like you're going to have to spend a lot of time there. It's You can tell when bears have been working over an area. There's just a lot of bear poop. There's good bear sign, and it's almost like, all right, jackpot. I know where to focus my efforts now. Let's talk a little bit about glassing and listening for bears. Have you guys ever used this approach?
Definitely glassing for sure. I don't know about listening, but one of the nice things about the mountain country, it's got its pros and cons. A lot of this stuff is awful thick, especially on the western slopes. I mean, it's just dog hair thick in there. It's got tons and tons of bears, but you can't see very far at all. But in spots, you can be looking up in avalanche chutes or higher elevation stuff, or places where there's some meadows cut out, or if in other areas of the state where there may be some timber harvest or patches, with that terrain provides you those glassing opportunities. And that's a great way. No different than real in a lot of ways. Spotting or glassing up deer sitting on a high ridge and looking, and that's definitely an effective way. You find them and get them bedded down, and use your wind to your advantage and sneak up on them.
Yeah. We've used listening for bears, like you were talking about, Danny. It's a lot of times they're in pretty thick, especially if they're on the pine nuts or if
Mm-hmm.
they're on cones. Man, they're just and you can't see into that. And so what we've done in the past is get up on a high point, and even though your visibility is really limited, a lot of times you're able to see not necessarily the bear, but you're able to see branches moving where these bears are in trees, in their if they're in the junipers, even, and you can hear limbs cracking, and it's like, okay, there they are right there. I have no idea. I've never seen, don't have eyes on the bear, but you know what's going on. And so we've used the spot and stalk technique quite a bit, just very similar to say deer or elk hunting, and opportunistic. Tell us about that. Do you think most of the bears in California that are killed during deer season are actually killed by deer hunters that have a bear tag in their pockets?
I think
What do
that's
you think,
probably
Kenny?
the case.
Yeah,
Ours,
Okay.
you probably speak better to that. Yeah.
Our data shows about 70% of bear tags that are filled are from deer tag holders. So it seems a lot of the time, people are out looking for deer and just bump into a bear, and that's when they take it.
Yeah. Thanks, Arjun.
Yeah,
That's really helpful. I didn't have any of the data there, but that's just more my experience talking to hunters and then also hunting deer myself. Often in some of the X zones that I work, and even in the D zones, you talk to hunters and they're seeing more bears than deer, and they're like finally getting wise to it and like, well, probably should put a bear tag in my pocket. So, did you have something to add to that, Mike?
oh no, I was just going to say,
Okay.
if you're like along that line, if you're finding those areas like you were talking about that are really thick with bear sign that they're working and not a place you can glass, your the likelihood of running into a bear just still hunting through there is probably going to be a little higher.
And I think there's more tactics than we're probably listing here, but I know that people call for bears. I don't think I know I haven't done that very much. I know that's getting to be a thing, and people are using a predator call. I have a good game warden friend that drew a Roosevelt elk tag, and he was in bear country, and he was actually cow calling and calf calling, and he brought multiple black bears in just to his calf call. So I think it could be a really effective technique. Have you guys had very much experience with this?
I used to do a lot of predator calling when I grew up in Virginia, and I used to do a lot of predator calling back there for primarily for foxes, bobcats, um, coyotes would get wise to it pretty quick, but the bobcats and foxes never did. But never drew in any bears, but I was never doing it really in bear country either.
Let's talk about black bear, the senses that a black bear has. Tell me about the way they survive in the woods. How do they avoid predators? How do they function in the woods, Danny?
Well, a bear, I think a bear. One way to think about this is, we humans, our primary sense for most of us is our eyesight. We can smell, we can hear, we can taste. But like our primary way of making sense of the universe around us is through our eyes, and it's different for bears. Their primary way of understanding the world is through their nose. They have an extraordinary sense of smell, and that's incidentally that's one of the reasons why bear spray can be or is extremely effective at dissuading a bear from going away from you, because it completely destroys their main way, not permanently, but temporarily destroys their main way of making sense of the world. So you've got to, especially if you're going to be, getting into close proximity, bow hunting, something like that, you've got to really be paying attention because the bears are paying attention. Their sense of smell is extraordinary. I don't know if it's true or not. I've heard is probably probably not true, but I've heard they can smell the difference in in canned food. They will, target the one with a higher calorie value. I have no idea if that's true or not, but it's
Yeah.
what I've heard.
I don't know if there's a way to test that either, brother. Uh, but yeah, I would definitely second what Danny's talking about. There's times where we'll have kill deer and just out of curiosity, got to dump it somewhere. So we'll dump it off of a road, off of a bank somewhere, and then set up a trail cam. And it is absolutely amazing how quick black bears will find that. And sometimes we'll make wagers amongst some of my buddies and be like, how long is it going to take? And it's not that out of the ordinary for a black bear to find that carcass within a 24-hour period, especially in a good bear area. So wind consideration is huge when stalking. I guess, what would you say a weakness of theirs would be as far as their senses? You guys know of one?
Oh, I guess I'd jump in. They can certainly become preoccupied with what they're doing. I
Yes.
think, and kind of that can be a weak spot if they're heavily foraging on something. In fact, I talked to a guy that he harvested a bear earlier this year at 17 yards. The bear didn't know he was there. It's just so focused on feeding. So that can be a weak spot. I'm sure there's others maybe you other guys are thinking of, but that's definitely one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking, their eyesight isn't as strong as their other senses. That's probably the main one that I think of.
I think you're right about that, Arjun. Yeah, just kind of a quick case study on that. My first archery bear was the last day of the season, and so it was like no holes barred. I had to get close, and I was pretty sure that bear could see me, and I got within 17 yards of that bear, and it just there. I don't know if that bear's eyesight was really poor or what was going on, but that bear just I was able to get super close, and I think their eyesight isn't as good as other wildlife. So let's talk real quick. We're running out of time, guys, but let's talk a little bit about track and sign. We've talked a little bit about scat and tracks. Tell me a little bit about beds. In general, would you want to hunt bears that are bedded? What's your experience with that? Danny, why don't you lead us off?
Sure. I mean, if you can spot one and can sneak up on it, it's a perfectly good way. Yeah, I would just you you do have to be careful just tromping around through bedding areas, though. They're good to know that they're there, but you don't want to spend a whole lot of time if you're not directly going after an animal, sort of tromping around in a bedding area, because that's where they're most safe and secure. They're going to be traveling from there back and forth to where areas where they're feeding. You can kind of blow things up if you spend too much time in there.
Very good point. And Mike, talk to us a little bit about track and sign and how you can use that to determine what animal you want to go after.
Yeah, I think, looking at both, the kind of sign you're looking at, like Danny's talking about beds versus rubs and scat, those are going to correspond to different behaviors and really different kind of different times that bears may be doing these different activities. But you can also get information on whether this bear is one you want to target or not. If you see a large track with a couple smaller sets of tracks going next to it, I mean, that's sowing cubs and not one you're going to want to go after. Similarly, if you find just a very large track and you're trying to go after trying to harvest a really large boar, you can make determinations based on on, just the size and the types of tracks you're finding, but along with, what those bears might be doing and where they might be at different periods of the day.
So what are these slides indicative of?
This slide depicts a very well used bed in a cave on a cliff band in the Eastern Sierra. You could see, multiple sets of tracks going in and out, and there was fresh tracks and fresh hair in there, suggesting that this was a bed that was being used frequently by the same bear. And then on the two slides on the right again show an older bed up on a ridge, and then in different habitat types like these riparian and thick willow stands, we've found you can find like really clear defined movement corridors like these. The top side is showing the entrance to a pretty intricate tunnel system through this big canyon. And, in a lot of cases, it's been able to show us kind of congregation points where bears are either going to be entering or exiting, kind of pinching that behavior, concentrating.
Thanks, Mike. So what are you doing in this slide, Danny? Where are you and what are you doing?
I'm
What
doing
are you looking at?
exactly what I just told everybody not to do by messing around in bedding area.
Yeah,
No, this was an area, this was on a hunt earlier this year. And I was out, we'd come across, didn't know that they were going to be there, but came across an area where it turned out to be a sow and her cubs. A couple of cubs had been bedding out there this year. And it was neat to find, non-target for us for, what we're going after, but it was just a neat place. And those bears had just spent a lot of time in that country.
one thing that I like about our presenters tonight is, yeah, they're wildlife biologists. They know a ton about bears, but I think it's really cool that they're also bear hunters. Danny, I think this is a younger you, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Is that you off to the right or left? I'm not sure.
That me off to the left there. That was I haven't killed many bears, but they've been separated by good distances in time. I think I was 20 years old. That's been that picture. That's why it looks like it was taken in the 1960s. I'm not that old. That was a bear I killed when I was a kid in Virginia, and then I killed one here in California a few years back. And yeah, they were. I wish we had time to tell more stories. We've been rambling on, but they're fun stories to tell.
Outstanding. And Mike, you're a pretty hardcore bear hunter yourself. Tell us what you're doing in this picture, and have you been successful harvesting a bear in the past?
I haven't. I'm actually fairly recent to bear harvest. Like I said, I've
Yeah,
spent most of my career tracking, dealing with bears, but it's something I really enjoy doing. Yet to be successful at it, but just been starting to put a pretty good effort into it.
awesome. It looks to me like you're kind of setting up in an area where you might think there's bears in the area, and kind of setting up a little blind. And if you're not setting up a blind, maybe you're collecting firewood. I love it. So,
It's
um,
just blasting from a spot.
yeah. So I think there's a pretty big misconception, at least old wives' tales that I've heard for as long as I've been a game warden. Uh, People say, even good experienced hunters uh, kind of perpetuate this rumor that bear meat tastes bad. Um, but on the other hand, I've also heard the same thing about antelope meat. And in my opinion, antelope meat is primo. So why do you guys think that why do you think this rumor exists, and why do you think it keeps getting perpetuated? And do you believe it to be true? What are your thoughts, Danny?
Well, I can tell you I mean, obviously these are all subjective things, but my opinion is no, it's not
Yeah.
true at all. And in fact, if I don't know how it got started necessarily, but bear meat was a huge source of protein during like in the colonial period, before a lot of Western migration. I mean, bear meat like fed people in the finest restaurants of New York and Boston, during those periods of
Mm.
time. And, the trappers of those days, Daniel Boone was out there killing, a huge number of bears, selling the meat. So I don't know where it came from. It could be, I mean, yeah, deer and elk and all of those stuff are really good, but uh, bear's great. There a lot of it I think may have to do with how it's handled. Bears are large animals. They're difficult to takes a lot more work to get them out of the woods. And if you don't prepare them, get them skinned or not skinned, but get those guts out quickly. That could have part to do with it. I'm not sure. I have to say, out of the bears that I've killed, one of them wasn't the greatest. The other was I mean, my wife tells me it's the best meat she's ever had. And I attribute the second one, it was a younger female bear. Um, and we aged that meat for about a week. And I mean, we ate steaks, the back straps, we made it. I mean, I think a lot of people just, if they do kill a bear, they'll just grind the whole thing up. I personally would recommend against that. There's some real good steaks and roasts in there, just like there are in any other animal.
Well said, Danny. I love that. Yeah, I've ate a lot of bears, and I've never had a mountain bear that's tasted bad. I've had some older bears um, that are pretty hard to make steaks out of, and so we do end up grinding some of that. But I'm with you on that, Danny. I think that at the first bear that I ever harvested, it was a humongous bear, and it was like I packed this thing out, got all the meat out, and now we're sitting at the kitchen table literally processing it, and it's like, oh boy, how is this going to taste? And so we just literally stopped processing the bear and put a steak on the barbecue, literally put salt and pepper on it, and it was absolutely fantastic. So I think bears do kind of have a bad rap, and um, maybe people are eating bears that have been eating fish and stuff like that. That's not so much going on in the Sierras. Mostly they're on other crops. They're on
Yeah.
berries and pinyons and stuff like that, and acorns. And man, so I would highly recommend bear meat. And um, so I guess the precaution on that is we've got it in this slide is you got to heat it to 160 degrees. You can't do like you do with like an elk steak and just cook it medium rare. And this slide doesn't show a lot of pink in that. It doesn't show any pink in that. So heat it to 160 degrees. And then talk to me a little bit about rendering the fat. That's become a big thing. I hear that all over the place. Have you ever done that, Danny?
I
And what's the
have,
purpose for
yes.
doing that?
Yeah, the fat of a bear is liquid gold in my opinion. In particular because I may not look like it, but I really like to bake. I don't fit the stereotype of a baker, but I do. And especially I'm from the South. I make biscuits a lot. And bear fat, rendered down bear fat is really good for that. It's really good for making pie crusts. It's good for all kinds of stuff. You can clean your guns with it. You can oil your boots with it. You can do all kinds of stuff. But on the culinary side is where it really shines, I think. And rendering it down's super easy to do. You just cut it into small chunks and with a little bit of water on a pot and just heat it up slowly till it renders down, and then you can separate it out. It's good stuff.